The taiga was quiet, a vast expanse of towering pines, birch trees, and the soft rustling of leaves under the gentle breeze. It was the kind of silence that felt peaceful but eerie at the same time, as though the forest itself was waiting for something to happen. In the middle of this endless wilderness walked a young girl, no older than 10. Her name was Elena. Her long brown hair swayed with each step, and her bright green eyes were full of curiosity, though there was a hint of worry too, like she sensed something was amiss. Elena's small feet moved carefully over the uneven ground, her pink dress brushing the tall grass. She had wandered far from her family's cabin, lost in her thoughts, as she often did. The taiga was beautiful but unforgiving. Elena knew it well. She had grown up surrounded by these trees, and despite the quiet, she never felt truly alone. Her heart always felt safe, knowing that someone watched over her. She didn't understand it fully, but the bond she shared with the land, and something, or someone else, was stronger than any fear she might have felt. However, today was different. The air was thick, charged with something she couldn't quite place. She heard the usual sounds of the birds and wind, but there was something else. A soft, subtle rustle, like footsteps in the brush. But no one was around. She paused, her hand instinctively moving to her side where she often carried a small knife, just in case. Then, from behind the trees, came the shadow of figures. At first, Elena thought it was a trick of the light. But as the figures drew nearer, her heart skipped a beat. A group of men, dressed in dark clothing, appeared. They were moving cautiously, like predators, eyes scanning the woods as if they were hunting. Elena's breath caught in her throat. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but her legs refused to move. Fear held her in place, frozen. The men noticed her almost immediately, their eyes narrowing with interest. They spoke in low, gravelly voices, too far for Elena to understand. But she knew what they were saying. They were planning something. The tallest of the men, a broad-shouldered figure with a scar across his cheek, started walking toward her slowly. The others followed. Elena's heart raced. She wanted to scream, but the words wouldn't come. She glanced around. The forest seemed to close in around her. The wind stopped, and the silence grew even heavier. Elena's mind raced, trying to think of a way to escape. She couldn't outrun them. She was just a child, and they were grown men, armed with weapons. She had no choice but to stay still and hope they would leave her alone. But then, as the tall man reached out to grab her arm, a strange sound filled the air. It was low, almost like a growl, but deep and menacing. The hairs on the back of Elena's neck stood up. She could feel the ground vibrating under her feet, as though something massive was approaching. The men paused, looking around in confusion. They couldn't see what Elena could feel. Something was coming. The girl's heart pounded in her chest, but she dared not move. The man reached for her once more, but before he could touch her, a massive shape burst from the underbrush. The men's eyes widened in shock and terror. A giant wolf, its fur as gray as the storm clouds overhead, leaped into view. Its golden eyes gleamed with ferocity. It was unlike any wolf they had ever seen. The creature's muscles rippled as it stood tall, its teeth bared in a snarl that sent a chill down the men's spines. The girl's expression didn't change. Elena's eyes locked with the wolf's, and for a moment, it felt like time stood still. She wasn't afraid. In fact, she felt safe. She had known this wolf all her life, though she never fully understood the connection. The wolf wasn't just an animal. It was her protector, her guardian, and it had always been there, watching from the shadows. The men had no idea what they had just walked into. As they took a step back, the wolf let out a deep, rumbling growl that echoed through the trees. The air around them seemed to grow colder, the forest darker. Elena's eyes didn't leave the wolf as it stood in front of her, ready to defend her. The thieves were frozen, unsure of what to do next, but they knew one thing. They had made a terrible mistake. The forest, the girl, and the wolf were all connected in ways the men could never understand. And now, they were about to find out just how dangerous that bond could be. The air in the Taiga had turned unnaturally still. The trees, which had once whispered with the soft wind, now stood silent, as if they too were holding their breath. Elena stood frozen, her eyes locked on the wolf who had appeared out of nowhere, its golden eyes glaring at the group of men. She didn't move a muscle, sensing that the danger was far from over. The men, however, had no idea what they were dealing with. They were staring at the massive creature in disbelief, their faces pale, their hands trembling as they reached for their weapons. The leader of the group, the tall man with the scar across his cheek, took a cautious step back, his eyes darting around nervously. He was the first to speak, his voice low but edged with fear. "What is that?" he hissed. "It's just a wolf." "No," one of the other men muttered, his hand trembling as he clutched his rifle. "That's no ordinary wolf. Look at the size of it." The wolf stood its ground, its eyes never leaving the men. Its body was massive, built like a beast of myth, muscles rippling under the thick coat of fur. The growl that emanated from its throat was deep and menacing, a clear warning that the men were not welcome in this part of the forest. The wolf's sharp fangs glistened in the dim light filtering through the trees, and its tail flicked in anticipation. Elena could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The men had no idea what they were about to face, but she did. The wolf was not just any wild animal. It was part of the forest, part of her world, and it would protect her at all costs. The bond between them was stronger than anything the men could imagine. They were intruders, and the wolf was its defender. For a moment, the men stood still, unsure of what to do. The leader of the group, whose name Elena had never learned, took another step back. His hand rested on the rifle slung across his shoulder. He glanced at his men, his face tight with frustration and fear. "Stay calm," he ordered. "We're armed. We can take it down." But his words had no effect on the growing tension in the air. Elena could feel the pulse of energy around her, the shift in the forest as the wolf tensed, ready to strike. The thieves didn't understand the danger they were in. They thought the wolf was just a wild animal, something they could kill easily. But they were wrong. Elena's heart pounded in her chest as she watched the men. She was afraid, not of the wolf, but of the men's next move. She could sense that if they made a wrong choice, things would spiral out of control. The leader of the group raised his rifle, pointing it at the wolf. His hand shook, but his eyes were hard with determination. "Get back, girl," he shouted at Elena, his voice trembling. "This doesn't concern you. Step aside." Elena stood still, her gaze not leaving the wolf. It was as if the world around her had faded, leaving only the connection between her and the creature that had always been there. She didn't know how it worked or why it was so, but she trusted the wolf completely. She trusted that it would keep her safe, just as it always had. Without warning, the wolf moved, its massive body surging forward like lightning. The men jumped back in shock, their rifles aiming wildly at the creature. But the wolf was too fast, too powerful. It darted to the side and lunged toward the man who had aimed the rifle at Elena. The man screamed in terror as the wolf's fangs narrowly missed him. But the wolf's powerful jaws slammed into the ground beside him, sending a shockwave of force through the earth. The men staggered back, panic rising in their eyes. The leader, seeing that their weapons were useless, shouted to his men, "Retreat! Get to the car. We have to get out of here." But the wolf wasn't done. It growled again, louder this time, its eyes glowing with a ferocity that sent chills through the men. The ground beneath them seemed to tremble as if the earth itself was echoing the wolf's warning. They had underestimated the power of the forest, and now they were trapped. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She could see the terror in the men's eyes, but there was no pity in her heart. They had come here with evil intentions, and now they would have to face the consequences. The wolf stood between her and the men, guarding her with all the strength it had, its stance firm and unyielding. The thieves tried to retreat, but the forest had closed in around them. The wolf's presence was like a wall, a barrier they couldn't cross. Every movement they made was met with the growl of the beast, warning them not to take another step. The girl, small and vulnerable, had a protector, a force of nature. And the men realized too late that they were the prey, not the hunters. The atmosphere in the Taiga was electric, charged with a kind of tension that made the air feel thick and unbreathable. The group of thieves, their eyes wide with fear, were now trapped between the towering trees, with no way out. The wolf stood as a silent, immovable barrier, its glowing golden eyes watching them with a quiet intensity that sent shivers down their spines. The men had never known a creature so powerful, so wild, and so relentless. It was a predator in its purest form, and they had made the fatal mistake of crossing into its territory. The leader of the thieves, his face twisted with frustration and fear, fumbled with his rifle, trying to steady it. He had expected a simple robbery, an easy target, a helpless girl wandering alone in the vast, empty forest. But what he hadn't anticipated was the fierce protector standing between them and their prize. The wolf was not just an animal, it was a force of nature, and now it was their greatest threat. "Back off," the leader growled, his voice shaky. His hands gripped the rifle so tightly his knuckles turned white. "This doesn't concern you, animal. Step away from the girl, and we'll let you go." But the wolf didn't move. It didn't even flinch. It stood tall, its powerful body tense and ready to strike. Its eyes locked with the leader's, a silent warning in their depths. The men could feel the weight of the wolf's stare, a coldness that penetrated to the very marrow of their bones. It was as if the creature could see into their souls, knowing their deepest fears, their darkest intentions. Elena, standing behind the wolf, felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. She knew the wolf would protect her. It always had. It was more than just a companion. It was her guardian, a creature bound to her in a way that words could never explain. She trusted it with her life, just as it trusted her. The bond between them was ancient, forged through years of silent understanding and mutual respect. They were a team, and nothing could break that. The leader of the thieves, realizing that his threat had no effect, made a sudden move. With a sharp motion, he raised his rifle and aimed it directly at the wolf. The men behind him followed suit, each pointing their weapons at the massive creature, their eyes full of desperation. "If you move, we'll shoot. Let her go," he commanded, his voice low and filled with venom. But the wolf wasn't afraid. It had no fear of these men, these weak humans with their loud, shiny weapons. The creature's body rippled with power as it took a step forward, a low growl building in its chest. It was a sound that seemed to come from the depths of the earth, a sound that vibrated in Elena's bones and echoed through the trees. The wolf was not threatening them with just its teeth or claws. It was threatening them with the primal force of the wild, with the ancient power of the forest. The leader of the thieves took a step back, his face pale, his grip on the rifle faltering. For the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. This was no ordinary wolf. This was something far beyond their understanding, something that couldn't be controlled or threatened. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath, as if it too was waiting to see what would happen next. Elena felt a strange surge of courage. She had always known that the wolf was more than just a protector. It was a part of the forest, a part of her life, and it would never allow harm to come to her. She stepped forward, her small hand resting gently on the wolf's side. She felt its muscles tense beneath its fur, but it didn't move. It was waiting for her signal. The men didn't know what to do. The leader barked another command, his voice rising in panic, but the wolf was unfazed. With a flash of movement, the creature sprang forward, its massive jaws snapping shut just inches from the leader's face. The man stumbled backward, his rifle falling from his hands in shock. The other thieves froze, their eyes wide with terror. The wolf's roar echoed through the trees, a warning they could not ignore. "Elena," one of the thieves cried, his voice high with fear. "Run. Get away from it." But Alina didn't run. She stood tall, her eyes never leaving the wolf, her protector. She knew this moment was the point of no return. The wolf had revealed itself fully, not just as an animal, but as a guardian, as a force that would defend her against anything. The men had thought they were the hunters, but now they were the prey, and they had no idea what they were up against. The leader of the thieves turned and ran, followed by the others, their steps frantic, their hearts pounding with fear. The wolf didn't chase them. It didn't need to. Its presence alone was enough to send the men scrambling, vanishing into the forest as quickly as they had appeared. Alina watched them go, her heart pounding in her chest, but there was no fear in her. She turned to the wolf, her protector, and for a moment, the two of them stood together in the silence of the taiga, a bond unspoken but understood. The wolf's golden eyes softened, and Alina smiled. She had been saved, not by her own strength, but by the powerful protector who had always watched over her. The taiga was eerily quiet now. The only sounds that remained were the gentle rustling of the leaves and the distant calls of birds. The air, once thick with tension, had settled into a calm stillness. Alina stood still, her small hand resting gently on the powerful form of the wolf beside her. The thieves had vanished into the forest, running away from the terror they had brought upon themselves. But Alina knew that the danger wasn't entirely over. The wolf hadn't just protected her from the immediate threat. It had sent a clear message. The forest, her protector, would never allow harm to come to her. She glanced at the wolf, her heart filled with gratitude. The creature's golden eyes, usually fierce and wild, now held a calmness, as if it knew the threat had passed. Its fur, sleek and strong, shimmered in the dappled sunlight that filtered through the trees. The wolf wasn't just an animal. It was something more. Alina had known this all her life, but now, after the events of the past few hours, she understood the depth of the bond between them. It wasn't just the wolf protecting her. It was the forest itself. Together, they were unstoppable. The wolf turned its head toward the forest's edge, its ears flicking as if hearing something far off in the distance. Alina followed its gaze, sensing the shift in the air. The wolf's instincts were sharper than hers, and they knew when the danger had truly passed. Alina took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. She was safe, for now. The thieves had been driven away, but there was no telling when or if they would return. Still, she had no fear. With the wolf by her side, she knew she could face anything. "Thank you," Alina whispered softly, her voice full of emotion. She wasn't sure if the wolf understood her words, but the bond they shared was more than enough. The wolf tilted its head slightly, as if acknowledging her gratitude, and then began to move toward the forest's edge. Alina followed, staying close to the creature that had just saved her life. As they walked, Alina reflected on what had just happened. She couldn't believe the thieves had come so close to harming her, but she also knew she hadn't been alone. Her protector had always been there, even when she didn't see it. The wolf had always been watching from the shadows, waiting, and now it had revealed its true power. The girl and the wolf were a team, bound by something deeper than words, and nothing would ever break that bond. They reached the clearing where Alina had first wandered earlier in the day. The sky was turning soft shades of orange and pink as the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the land. Alina stopped for a moment, looking around the vast, wild expanse of the taiga. She felt an overwhelming sense of peace, knowing that the forest and everything within it was her home, and the wolf was part of it. She wasn't alone. But even as she stood there, feeling safe and secure, Alina knew the world outside the taiga was different. The thieves would likely return with more men. They had underestimated the forest, but they wouldn't forget what had happened today. Alina's life might never be the same again. She would need to be stronger, more aware of the dangers that lay outside the safety of her forest. But she would face them all, with the wolf by her side. The wolf stopped in the clearing and turned to face her, its golden eyes reflecting the fading light. Alina knelt down beside it, placing a hand on its head. It nuzzled her gently, the warmth of its fur comforting her. She knew that together they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the bond between Alina and the wolf was stronger than ever. They had shared something that no one could ever take from them. In that moment, Alina understood the true meaning of protection, loyalty, and strength. It wasn't just about surviving. It was about living together. With the wolf at her side, Alina was no longer just a little girl wandering the taiga. She was part of something greater, a force of nature that would always be there, no matter what. And as the first stars began to twinkle in the sky above, Alina smiled, knowing that whatever the future held, she and the wolf would face it together, as one.